Chapter 226. No matter how many people noticed the strangeness in Luo Nan's pupils, Cat Eyes' feelings were 10 times stronger than theirs. It must be known that she was the one facing Luo Nan directly. Moreover, she was the unlucky one who suffered Luo Nan's torment early on. Right now there was a chain that locked her body and soul, and behind these turbid eyes was a pair of demonic eyes. They looked at her from the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside. They saw through her completely. The most terrifying thing was that she did not know how Luo Nan did it. She did not know a shred of it. It was like a figment of her imagination. But the trembling in the depths of her body and soul was so real. Cat Eyes' breathing stopped for half a second. It was this half a second that evoked the feeling of terror that surged like a tide when she encountered the Devil's Ritual at Limestone Water Village pub last week. It was as if the churning emotions could drown her at any time. It even gave her the urge to turn around and run. Cat Eyes' feet did not move, but her entire body was stiff. She saw Luo Nan raise his right hand at this time. His 5 fingers were slightly open and bent, and his index finger was slightly straighter. It was as if he was subconsciously drawing something. But it was also as if he was going to directly reach over. Luo Nan's arm really did reach forward. At the same time, Cat Eyes could clearly feel the space between her eyebrows tremble slightly. It was not that Luo Nan's fingertips had touched her. In reality, Luo Nan's arm was not extended straight. His fingertips were still some distance away from the brim of Cat Eyes' hat. He just tapped from a distance, and the direction of his finger corresponded to the space between her eyebrows. With the tap of his finger he swiped downwards. Then, or even earlier, Cat Eyes' face, throat, shoulders, back, chest, abdomen, and even her legs began to tremble one after another. Luo Nan's finger moved down like a shadow, tracing Cat Eyes in the blink of an eye. It seemed to draw an extremely simple outline of a body. Cat Eyes did not move at all. She let him do as he pleased. This angered Zhang Yingying to the side. Luo Nan's perverted method, no matter what it meant, would only increase the distance between him and the others. It would make the situation even worse. She immediately shouted, "Hey! What kind of demonic madness is this?" Luo Nan turned his head upon hearing this. His gaze met Zhang Yingying's, and he reached out and tapped through the air. Zhang Yingying was so angry that she was amused. She couldn't move her upper body, but she forcefully kicked her legs in exasperation. She wanted to teach this crazy boy a lesson. However, she had only lifted half of her slender, snow-white legs when her chest and abdomen began to tremble. This time, Zhang Yingying knew how powerful he was. She let out a sigh. Even though Bai Xinyan was strangling her neck, she couldn't help but twist her body to resist the inexplicable trembling and itchiness. Her long legs, which she had raised up, also gave way. Next, no matter how Zhang Yingying dodged, Luo Nan's extended finger was always able to accurately correspond with the trembling points on her body. In the blink of an eye, another outline was drawn. At this moment, Bai Xinyan didn't even have the time to release her arm to free Zhang Yingying. Zhang Yingying had been in a great rage, but the moment Luo Nan's fingers stopped moving, the white rainbow that revolved around her body gave an inexplicable soft cry. It resonated with the trembling points from afar. The power that had been painstakingly polished over the past few days seemed to have gained a bit more purity and clarity. She was stunned. No one besides her knew of the changes that had occurred within Zhang Yingying's body. However, Luo Nan displayed a treacherous and bewitching scene. Even He Yuan, who had been calm and collected all this time, gave up pondering over the situation. She opened her eyes wide and looked over. Luo Nan truly withdrew his hand when he finished drawing the outline of Zhang Yingying's body. This was already enough for him. Luo Nan narrowed his eyes at this moment. He didn't need to use his naked eyes for his mental senses to light up with resplendent starlight. What should have been the cat's eye's position was not the cat's eye. Instead, it was a simple structure formed from a dozen or so bright specks of starlight, and the connections between the specks of starlight. Zhang Yingying's position was the same, but it was a bit more concise. This was like the basic composition that people were used to using to mark the constellations in the sky. And within the range of Luo Nan's senses, the number of these constellations was increasing without end. The blessing of Fairchild's shield of truth was temporary, but in the end, it allowed Luo Nan to understand what he could do with his current soul strength with the support of a tough and resilient body. Compared to the pure out-of-body state, the body and soul as one state had many limitations, but it also had benefits that the soul body could not achieve. The most direct change was reflected in the mutual interference between the mental and the material planes. The configuration outline of the body and soul, as one became the hub for the highly efficient conversion of energy and information. The pressure on the fleshly body exploded, but the consumption caused by the mutual interference decreased by at least 50%. In other words, the effect of Luo Nan's soul strength interfering with reality had doubled in the blink of an eye, and the interference that needed to be overcome during the process was greatly reduced. The first thing that could be seen was the substantial increase in precision. Luo Nan had always been particularly sensitive to energy and information. He could measure the material plane in terms of precision. His limit was displayed when he used clairvoyance on his own body. It was approximately 1/10 millimeter. When placed outside his body, it was on the millimeter scale. It was only a rough observation. It was not particularly exquisite. But right now, the limit of his external precision easily broke through the domain of 1/10 millimeter. The results even surpassed the resolution of the naked eye. Even though there was still a difference of heaven and earth between this and precise observation instruments on the nanometer scale, this meant that within the range of his clairvoyance, no matter what kind of shadow or corner it was like he was there in person. Moreover, he could see everything clearly regardless of the intensity of the light. And if he concentrated his energy, shrunk the range, and increased it by another level, he was completely capable of accomplishing this. The large increase in precision was obviously a good thing, but this change did not bring convenience to Luo Nan. Instead, it brought a large amount of useless details and junk information: the floating dust, the crawling insects, the filth in the corner of the wall, and of course, the background noise of electric currents, the messy breathing of humans, the rustling sound of rain falling from the ceiling of the amusement park, and even the changes in temperature, the exchange of air, and so on. These details, which were hard to notice in the past, were all interwoven and mixed together, pushing towards Luo Nan. Of course, the stimulation of information from multiple levels and angles had to be fed back to the structure of his body and soul. But the corresponding processing efficiency was bound to be limited by the speed of nerve conduction, methods, and other material planes. It was impossible to process everything big and small. Luo Nan had to make some trade-offs. It must be said that humans had formed a fuzzy recognition mechanism over the course of hundreds of thousands of years of genetic evolution. They were used to starting with the overall characteristics of things, avoiding the pressure of identifying too many details. But the problem Luo Nan faced, right now, was that the original fuzzy whole had been divided into large amounts of clear details under the circumstances of the substantial increase in the precision of his senses. The boundary between the two had collapsed. The clearer the details, the greater the amount of information, and the greater the consumption of analytical resources. This directly affected the upper limits of the types of information Luo Nan could receive. It also limited the range of his senses. Chapter 227. How could the old world be explained in a new way? Luo Nan faced this challenge the moment he unleashed his all-encompassing senses. He had to focus his attention to analyze the various basic information elements and rearrange their order. There was a period of time when he reached the state where he could no longer see a mountain and no longer see water. Living people, living emotions were all decomposed. For example, cat eyes. Luo Nan knew that she was afraid the moment he came into contact with her. And this living example would be decomposed by him into breathing, heartbeat, pupils, muscles, and even hormone secretion and conduction. He would then reconstruct them. He wanted to find a more concise, more essential special structure that was able to describe all kinds of people and all kinds of states. If it were anyone else, they would have been beaten senseless in front of such a huge amount of detailed material. They would have lost their ability to completely reconstruct things. They would have been no different from a lunatic at that time. Luonan was stupefied in the beginning. The radius of his mental senses extended to around 80 meters, covering Area A. His senses nearly collapsed. The large amount of detailed information was like a network virus. It flooded all of his sensors in a short period of time, congealing his neural network. The high-intensity stimulation in a short period of time caused him to experience serious neurological activity suppression. His cognitive abilities greatly deteriorated, and his IQ dropped by a level. Fortunately, Luonan had the support of the Shield of Truth. His nervous system, and even his entire fleshly body, had a substantial increase in endurance and recovery. This allowed him to withstand the initial assault of the junk information. Then Luonan made a crucial choice. He temporarily gave up on everything on the purely material plane. He only paid attention to the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. In other words, the domain of life. This was probably around the time when Red Fox was yelling at He Yuan to wipe his face and butt. Back then, Luonan just wanted to fight for his honor. He wanted to use the most outstanding results to complete He Yuan's mission and shut up Red Fox's stinky mouth. According to the requirements of the mission, the most crucial thing was to find the hidden Ablatum Knights of the Order of Justice. Luonan's choice was forced by the situation, but it was precisely because of this that he unexpectedly broke through his blocked train of thought. The number of constellations increased endlessly. Cat Eyes and Zhang Yingying weren't the only ones. Everyone in the surroundings, including He Yuan, Bai Xinyan, Xue Lei, Xue Weiluan, and the special forces, were all transforming in this direction under the clairvoyance of Luonan's mental senses. However, compared to Cat Eyes and Zhang Yingying's constellations that were close to abstract symbols, the others' reflections were more like sketches of portraits that were quickly copied. The lines were scattered and scattered, covering up the stars. They were faintly discernible and had a somewhat hard to determine meaning. Luonan called them life sketches. This was his new interpretation of the old world. The real world was still an object that could be ignored. Luonan was in the middle of comprehending and combing through the marvels of the life sketches when someone grabbed him by the collar. "Kid, you're acting like a hoodlum. What the hell are you doing?" The only one who could do that was Zhang Yingying. She finally broke free from Bai Xinyan's control and rushed forward to retaliate. She turned her face and asked Cat Eyes, "Kitty, are you all right?" Cat Eyes did not speak. She just lowered her eyes. The shadow of her flat-brimmed hat covered half her face. She did not look happy no matter how one looked at it. "Hey, are you guys done yet?" Papercut finally could not hold back from speaking in the encrypted channel. "This isn't the time to be flirting, right?" The words were directed at Zhang Yingying, but halfway through his words, Papercut inexplicably recalled Luonan's pair of motley eyes. He shuddered. He instinctively felt that he should not overlook this fellow with those evil eyes. His thoughts spun and he simply said, "Boss Luo, I don't have any other requests. Can you give me a clear explanation? Even if you don't want to prove it, a reason is fine." Papercut and Bamboo Pole had already arrived at the outskirts of Frost River reality. They had locked onto Red Fox's position. He said this because he wanted to use the conversation in the encrypted channel to distract Red Fox's attention. Papercut did not even hope that Luonan would reply. As long as Red Fox could see Luonan's eyes, he would be stunned. "Hey, Cat Eyes, what the hell are you looking at the floor for?" Just as he was quietly closing in, feeling the pressure like a mountain, a buzzing sound suddenly brushed past his head. He raised his head and saw a miniature flying shuttle that was only half the length of an arm. It streaked through the curtain of rain in the night sky and plunged into the hall of Frost River reality. Deep space gray paint job. Military? Or is it the aerospace army? Papercut saw the origin of the flying shuttle and felt it was a bit strange. However, he did not have the time to think too much about it. Suddenly, a brand new image popped up in the encrypted channel. It was a real-time surveillance video. It was shot from a high vantage point in the inner region of Frost River reality. It looked a bit shaky. Papercut immediately thought that this was the masterpiece of the flying shuttle from the military. The image of the military flying shuttle entered the encrypted channel of the society. What was going on? Before he could figure it out, The image split up and connected to the surveillance results of Frost River reality itself. The flying shuttle was taken into the frame. From this angle, one could see the eye-catching military logo on the side of the shuttle. The flying shuttle passed through several surveillance cameras in a row. It flew nimbly within Frost River reality. The built-in camera circled the most critical area, Area A. Then, the camera zoomed in and narrowed its range. Soon it locked onto the true target. Right in the center of the camera was the fat corpse that Luo Nan called the Ablatum Knight. At the same time, the main image split up once more. There was an additional surveillance camera that illuminated the fat corpse from a different angle. What's the meaning of this? She's playing for real. Papercut and Bamboo Pole's exclamations were completely different. Papercut was stunned. He turned his head and saw Bamboo Pole give him a signal. Bamboo Pole extended 3 fingers. Right now, the two of them were only 5 meters away from Red Fox. Red Fox seemed to be in a daze. He was completely unaware of what was happening. Papercut dispelled his distracting thoughts. He did not care about the progress of the video in the encrypted channel. Under Bamboo Pole's command, he counted to 3 and suddenly pounced forward. He reached out and grabbed Red Fox's left shoulder. At the same time, Bamboo Pole grabbed Red Fox's right shoulder. The two of them exerted force at the same time. They had to prevent Red Fox from breaking free. However, the two of them were curious after they made contact. Where did that feeling of being solid and empty come from? In any case, they had Red Fox under control. Red Fox was clearly a bit stunned, but he did not struggle. Papercut was quite baffled. Could it be that Red Fox had figured it out? Or, he had a feeling in his heart. His attention returned to the encrypted channel. He saw the gunmen of the Order finally discover the troublesome intruder that was the military flying shuttle. They immediately raised their guns and fired. The military flying shuttle made evasive maneuvers. However, several gunmen with a high level of tacit understanding fired in a crisscross manner. In the end, the flying shuttle was blasted apart by the electromagnetic bullets in midair. The image that overlooked the scene instantly turned black. However, it could be seen from the surveillance footage that the flying shuttle's own weapons had opened fire at the same time before being shot. The target was not any of the gunmen. It was the fat corpse that was lying on the ground. The military is verifying it. Before Papercut could finish his thought, the fat corpse exploded with a bang in the next second. Flesh, blood, and bone sprayed everywhere. The ground was filled with holes wherever it passed. The nearby walls were pierced through. The penetrative power was incomparable. What made everyone's eyelids twitch the most was that a small and thin figure shot out from the splattering mist of blood. It instantly flashed out of the surveillance footage. Chapter 228. What the hell? Papercut's exclamation was absolutely the thoughts of most people in the encrypted channel. Although the skinny figure was fast, there was not a single person in the encrypted channel who did not have sharp eyes and ears. They could clearly see the flickering changes of the figure. The skinny figure had clearly leaped out from the exploded corpse. The monitoring screen switched quickly. It switched continuously, but it only captured a fleeting afterimage. This situation persisted for around 3 to 5 seconds before the screen turned black once more. It was at this moment that all the monitoring screens were finished. Papercut hurriedly asked Bamboo Pole, "What's going on?" Bamboo Pole was helpless. "Don't ask me. Someone just used official channels to take away the highest level of authority in the monitoring system. Then the Order of Justice probably carried out physical destruction. Now I can retreat." Most people ignored this clumsy joke. Their minds were still flashing with the earlier scene. The figure that leaped out from the disintegrated corpse. There was no doubt that the argument just now had a result. But the encrypted channel was extremely silent. Whether it was Luo Nan or poisonous snake Zhang Yingying, neither of them spoke. Clearly, they were taking Red Fox's emotions into consideration. Of course this was good, but Papercut and Bamboo Pole glanced at each other. They secretly tightened their grip, at the same time to prevent Red Fox from thinking things through and doing something irrational. "The police are here," Red Fox said coldly. The 3 of them were too eye-catching right now. They poked into the stream of people holding their shoulders and arms. They looked like plainclothes thieves. A police officer controlling the order of the scene discovered this situation. He immediately approached with his gun pointed. Papercut would not dare to let go even if the Emperor of Heaven came, let alone the police. He did not know how to persuade Red Fox. Bamboo Pole used a method of provocation to speak. A man is a man. If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss. Do as you please. Red Fox was surprisingly straightforward. Papercut and Bamboo Pole looked at each other when they heard this. They just felt that Red Fox was so calm that it gave them headaches. They were unable to judge him. Red Fox just shook his shoulders and slid away from the grip of the two. He did not make any further movements. He just said calmly, "That fellow is Ghost Thunder. I met him once before." "Damn, it really is that big bomb." Papercut's answer was like a piece of paper that was broken with a touch. Ghost Thunder was one of the most famous Ablatum Knights of the Order of Justice in Xia City. This fellow's most famous ability was that he could turn most of the materials he came into contact with into terrifying explosives. Coupled with his extraordinary movement speed, whether it was attacking or assassinating, he was a terrifying character. The military shuttle's inexplicable verification had actually activated this terrifying character. No one knew who this guy's next target would be. The military has set the pace well. Scissors grumbled under his breath. But then he realized that something was wrong. It seemed like when the military shuttle flew in, a certain someone's reaction was very strange. He turned to look at Bamboo Pole. "What did you say earlier? Serious? Who's serious?" Bamboo Pole did not reply immediately. Instead, he sent a message into the encrypted channel. "We have met up with Red Fox. Be careful, it's Ghost Thunder." Now, everyone should have no objections to Mr. Luo's omnidirectional sensing ability. The one who spoke was He Yuan. No one would have thought that she, the operations manager, would not be afraid of blowing things up even though Zhang Yingying had misgivings. She would speak so directly. Papercut cried out bitterly in his heart. He instinctively reached out to grab Red Fox, but Red Fox did not move at all. His face was expressionless. Could it be that he was willing to accept his loss? Or was he drugged with bewitching drugs? Papercut retracted his hand in embarrassment. He Yuan did not pay attention to the matter of Ghost Thunder in the encrypted channel at this time. She just extended the topic of omnidirectional sensing. She issued an order. From now on, all communication must be done through the encrypted channel. Mr. Luo Cat Eyes confirmed the current omnidirectional sensing radius. 55 meters. Cat Eyes' answer was straightforward. This number was 10% higher than her usual performance. 80 meters. Luo Nan's nervous activity suppression symptoms had already disappeared. He was freed from his state of turning a deaf ear. He hesitated for a moment when he heard this, and reported a relatively conservative number. For the time being, Luo Nan was uncertain of He Yuan's mission requirements. He needed to be cautious. This was the limit of his ability to balance his life form and the purely material plane. He was a bit stronger than Cat Eyes, but he was far too lacking compared to the 500-meter sensing radius he had in his last operation. Sure enough, He Yuan was a bit surprised. 80 meters? Luo Nan was just about to explain when Zhang Yingying exposed the fact that she had violated the rules by looking up classified information. I remember that it was 500 meters in the briefing, but it was in an abnormal soul-attached state. Now that my body and soul are one, I can retain 16% of my sensing radius. Is the Shield of Truth really that useful? Luo Nan blinked. Was this number acceptable? He could not help but ask. What's the standard for 16%? Newbie. Zhang Yingying curled her lips in disgust, but she still explained. Due to the limitations of the material plane, the normal sensing range of a mentally enhanced person in the state of body and soul, as one has a huge gap when compared to the soul-attached, out-of-body state, and other mental forms. Normally, a person who can reach 8% to 10% is considered qualified. On the other hand, for someone like Kat, who specializes in perception, when she becomes an architect, she can casually go out of body state. It is possible for her sensing range to explosively increase by 10 or 20 times. At that time, you won't be considered much. Cat Eyes did not respond to Zhang Yingying's praise. Luonan slowly nodded his head. He had a general understanding of his level and position. Zhang Yingying was right. The enhancement of the Shield of Truth played a crucial role in supporting his current sensing range. His sensing radius of 80 meters was achieved by relying on his strong physical body's endurance. However, Zhang Yingying had used the wrong data. Luonan's retention ratio wasn't 16%. It was 10% or even lower. Last time, Luonan's soul was in an out-of-body state. Thanks to the Wraith Sign's 2 consecutive sacrificial activities, Luonan's mental senses had reached a radius of 800 meters. Yesterday the Wraith Sign had successfully hunted, causing his soul power to rise once again. Perhaps the upper limit of his sensing range would increase a little, but he didn't dare to try it anymore. The current range of Luonan's natural senses was only around 10 meters. The upper limit of his senses was 800 meters and only 2% of his senses were retained. This was 6 to 7 times lower than the lower limit. It was simply too horrible to look at. It was clear to see just how far the imbalance between his body and soul had reached. The increase in physical strength was not something that could be done in a day. It could not be rushed. However, Luonan had reason to believe that even if the effects of the Shield of Truth disappeared in the future, his retention ratio would no longer hover at the level of 1%. Instead, it would increase by a considerable amount. As for how much it would increase, that would depend on his life sketch. It would depend on whether or not it was a reasonable and self-consistent new explanation of the old world. Right now it looked like this was indeed a feasible direction. Draw a sketch. Refine a configuration. Use the most basic of points and lines to depict a rough and distinct life sketch. When the life sketch was simplified to its pinnacle, just like Cat Eyes and Zhang Yingying, every living being was depicted with concise points and lines. They were like groups of constellations on an ancient star atlas. They were shaken to various parts of the deep void. And with Luonan as the center, they revolved and cruised. And this star atlas was endlessly expanding deeper and wider. The current range had already expanded to over 100 meters, completely covering Area A of Frost River reality. Chapter 229. This was perhaps the clearest command He Yuan had issued since the beginning of tonight's operation. She even used the form of text to post the instructions in the encrypted channel. Current objective: eliminate all gunmen of the order. Priority is given to the non-ability users. Luonan is the first executor of Frost River reality and the connected buildings, while Cat Eyes is the second executor. Everyone else, protect Luonan and Cat Eyes as they move safely. Ensure that the entire range of Luonan's senses covers the entirety of Frost River reality and the connected buildings. What does that mean? The target itself was very clear, but not many people understood He Yuan's intentions. If he wanted to deal with the enemy, what about the Oblatum Knights of the Church? What about An Wang and the other secular officiants? That was the real deal. It's true that the opponent is currently focusing all his attention on Child. But do you really think he's a target when you make a move? I really don't know what He Yuan is thinking. Papercut turned his head to look at Bamboo Pole. You've been on a mission with the secretary before. Was she like this before? Papercut had already spoken rather tactfully. His true meaning was, why did this commander of the military's elite Deep Blue Walkers feel so unreliable? Bamboo Pole didn't say anything. He just smiled and tapped his ear, reminding him that He Yuan had already ordered all communication to be done through the encrypted channel set up by the Hexa Ear. As the commander, He Yuan issued an official order, and the encrypted channel immediately cleared up. Only the status of execution could be reported. To put it bluntly, this meant, from now on, everyone just focus on doing their job and don't talk nonsense. Next, He Yuan sent out even more specific orders and details within the encrypted channel. Luonan, Cat Eyes, and Shuelei formed the inner circle. Shui Weiluan and the special police will follow standard operational procedures and execute a closed-loop defense. White Salt, Yingying, and I will coordinate with each other on the perimeter. We will cover our advance in the 10 o'clock direction. Outside of Frost River reality, Papercut, who possessed some basic tactical accomplishments, felt his scalp go numb following He Yuan's command. There was nothing much to say about his route of action. The 10 o'clock direction was roughly a 60-degree angle from the Chu Hehan boundary, between the private room area and the public arena. Then he moved sideways. The goal was very clear. It was to display Luo Nan's all-encompassing sensing ability to the greatest limit. He would cover the enemies in Area A while pulling apart the distance to react. This choice was very correct. The problem was the formation. The SWAT team's closed-loop defense was a tactical formation used in close-range anti-riot operations. It could be used to protect the target within the closed loop when facing the siege of a large number of thugs who did not have long-range killing weapons. But now, He Yuan and the others were not only facing the cold-blooded gunmen of the Order, but also Ghost Thunder, who had a lot of long-range attacks. What would they do if they were hit in the middle by a high-explosive thunderfire? This. Just what was He Yuan thinking? While Papercut was dumbstruck, Bamboo Pole gestured for him to calm down and not be impatient. Bamboo Pole hinted at Red Fox, indicating that he could restrain himself right now. What about Papercut? At the moment, Bamboo Pole was still providing basic technical support for the logo. In order to avoid any accidents, he took the initiative to ask in the encrypted channel after he appeased Papercut. Boss Luo, can you confirm that the information conversion of the logo is normal? Luo Nan probably still wasn't used to this. 3 seconds passed before he said, "It's normal." Papercut scratched his head. He believed that quite a few of his companions who were participating in the operation were feeling the same way as him. Though there was certainly no one who doubted Luo Nan's sensing ability right now, this person was still too noob when it came to doing things. Bamboo Pole, on the other hand, was very patient. He explained one by one. In order to ensure timely updates, I have already relinquished control rights. Right now, you are the #1 controller. The secretary and kitten can mark the route and insert flags to make corrections. Have you played the classic Minesweeper before? That's what it means. Right now, you can use telekinesis mode to reset the logo into the encrypted channel. Oh, okay. Another 2 seconds passed, and the logo in the encrypted channel was finally reset. The logo was still based on the elevation of Frost River reality. It was densely covered with red and green dots. Those who had participated in the previous debate noticed that the location of the fat corpse no longer had a red dot. It looked like the specific content had been updated. Bamboo Pole gestured an okay to Papercut and Red Fox. He winked, indicating that the little fellow could still be saved. Red Fox's response was cold. Papercut smiled wryly. He felt that he had perfectly substituted himself into Red Fox's previous role. It was awkward no matter how he looked at it. Was he too neurotic? He tried to return to his previous peaceful state. But before Bamboo Pole could put down his hand, nearly half of the 16 or 17 red dots on the logo that represented the enemy were erased in a single breath. What's going on? Papercut felt very mystified. He nearly fainted. Even this can be mishandled? Right now, He Yuan was marking the next course of action on the logo. The extending blue arrow clearly stopped. She seemed to be stunned by this sudden scene. The encrypted channel was deathly silent for a time until Luo Nan's voice rang out. He was clearly inexperienced, but he strove to be experienced. It was just like the soldier's report. 7 gunmen have been eliminated. He Yuan. Cat eyes? Question mark. Bamboo Pole. Exclamation point. Papercut blurted out. What the hell? As for Red Fox, he smacked his fists against his palms, creating a crisp bang. Zhang Yingying had been bouncing around to warm up her body, preparing to deal with the upcoming fierce battle. She nearly sprained her ankle when Luo Nan's message came out. She rushed to support by Xinyan, turned her head and shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Everyone's reactions were different at this very moment. On the map, most of the motionless red dots suddenly became restless. Luo Nan's message continued to update while Cat Eyes added in a hoarse voice, "There are Ablatum Knights advancing toward us." 3 o'clock direction. They disappeared. The possibility of it being ghost thunder is extremely high. There are still 3 more behind them. No 4. It was as if an invisible drum had exploded in the air. The situation that had been stagnant all this time suddenly entered a high-altitude stalling state. Nearly everyone could feel a dizziness that bordered on absurd. Wayne displayed her top-notch mental qualities at this moment. She did not waste words and gave another order. 10 o'clock direction. Ying, hold down the pace. White salt, and I will protect the right flank. Move. The instant her words fell, everyone's vision suddenly darkened. The spectators outside of Frost River Reality cried out in alarm at the same time. At this moment, the focus of everyone's gazes, the triangular spaceship's power supply was cut off. The spaceship instantly darkened, and the interior of the spaceship was pitch black in comparison to the spotlights outside. Only a second or 2 passed before the cries of alarm scattered. This was because the darkness did not just cover Frost River Reality. It spread to the 3 connected buildings at an inconceivable speed. Chapter 230. The darkness that suddenly descended within Frost River Reality was like a curtain that covered one's face. Theoretically speaking, ability users with extraordinary powers and special forces, equipped with exoskeleton armor, would not be affected by the darkness. However, an atmosphere filled with malice and murderous intent followed the arrival of the darkness. Feelings and such were fabricated. They floated in the air, but the restless negative psychic pressure was real. The group of people from the society did not know the range of the darkness for now. However, they could personally feel the urgency and impatience within the darkness. The more it was like this, the more they needed to be steady. Under Yuan's deployment, Luonan was surrounded by the special forces armed with guns and shields. He advanced sideways, but his speed was not fast. Maintaining the formation was his #1 priority. Ghost Thunder and the other Ablatum Knights advanced with all their might. The distance between the 2 sides rapidly closed. Every Ablatum Knight was equivalent to a C+ rank awakened. They were infinitely close to the architect level. Overall, they followed the consistent logic of the order and cultivated strictly. The power they possessed was more focused, direct, and tyrannical than ability users with outstanding personalities. Moreover, there was a natural tacit understanding between them. When the 4 Ablatum Knights turned their attention to the Society's team at the same time, their malice intertwined with each other and blended with the darkness. It was like an incorporeal and brutal evil beast that roared soundlessly. At this moment, the format pyramid on the bodies of Xue Weiluan, his father, and the special forces shook at the same time. They were like candlelight in the wind, nearly extinguished. All of the attacks followed the flow of energy and information. Several firecrackers exploded on Luonan's mental plane. The attacks on the mental plane disturbed the structure of his body and soul. Luonan's feet were a bit messed up. Then Cat Eyes and Shuele grabbed his arms one after the other. They supported him as he moved. Cat Eyes did not say a word. Shuele whispered, "Nanster, are you okay?" Luonan shook his head. The enemy's response was very decisive. They immediately changed directions and advanced. They coordinated with the power outage and used the darkness to launch a powerful attack. It was filled with the feeling of planning. The faintly discernible feeling of discomfort that had been present ever since he left the luxurious room appeared once more. But this time, the feeling of indescribable inexplicable had lessened. The constellations circling within his mental senses were clearly revealing something. Luonan used a brand new perspective to analyze this dark and subtle hidden information. The most fundamental purpose of drawing the life sketches was to come up with a new explanation of the world in a dimension that was most suitable for him. He wanted to establish an axis and establish rules. Because of this, when Luonan drew these life sketches and pieced them together to form a marvelous starry sky, large amounts of chaotic information no longer rushed at him like a swarm of bees. Instead, they revolved around each constellation, interacting with each other. Only after a buffering and combing process was Luonan able to selectively extract the information. Such a model was also very crude. Compared to the feedback he received when his soul left his body in an out-of-body state, it was even more inferior. Many meaningful details would certainly be left out, and there would be a lot of redundancy at the same time. But in the end, it was an effective method of explanation, and it was most suited to Luo Nan's reality. It didn't matter what sort of secret methods the other party used. As long as they were effective against Luo Nan would be able to sense them. Naturally, there would be a new explanation for them on this star atlas. They would be incorporated into Luo Nan's rules, making it convenient for him to finally trace the source and lock onto the target. Originally, the information was very vague, but as the 4 Ablatum Nights advanced like a hurricane, Luo Nan's mind was filled with warning bells, and he was able to see things more clearly. In his eyes, the darkness was the background of the profound void. Dozens of constellations and hundreds of thousands of stars were circling back and forth. Now, they were rapidly approaching and clashing with each other, bringing an unprecedented brilliance to the star map that had been relatively still. It formed an interesting contrast with the restless negative spiritual pressure on the plane of reality. Everyone's life sketches were different. They appeared in the form of constellations. Some were simple, some were complex, some were clear, and some were blurry. Zhang Yingying and Cat Eyes were simple and clear. He already had a relatively deep understanding of them in the past. He Wayne and Bai Xinyan were powerful, and their configurations were exquisite and exquisite. With his current level of analysis, there were naturally more areas that were vague and ambiguous. As for the 4 Ablatum Knights represented by Ghost Thunder, they were strong and had deep enmity towards him. It was even more difficult for them to draw it clearly. Within Luo Nan's mental senses, the 4 knights, one in front and the other 3 at the back, were like 4 balls of nebula dust that had exploded in deep space. They came pouncing over. The collision on the star map level was a bit faster than the collision on the plane of reality. And when the 2 sides of the blurry chaos collided, the nodes and lines that were originally not very clear were purged of the dense fog. They suddenly became much clearer. As the star map changed, He Yuan, who was protecting the flank, issued an order: white salt cover. Just as her voice fell, the ceiling above the pitch-black sky exploded with a rumble. The decorative planks shattered in the explosion, turning into shrapnel that splashed in all directions. The special police officers were well trained. The shield bearers raised their shields at the same time, blocking the space above them. Clanging sounds rang out for a time. There were even a few popping sounds of explosions mixed in with the subtle cracking sounds of the shield structure being damaged. The explosion-proof shields could block the inner ring, but they were useless against He Yuan, Bai Xinyan, and Zhang Yingying, who were roaming around the outer ring. Zhang Yingying was fine. She took 2 quick steps to the front and evaded it. The remaining 2 were within the range of the explosive shrapnel, and their reactions were completely different. Bai Xinyan's movement speed did not change at all. It was just that a cold wave suddenly rose from her body, sweeping through the air. Any shrapnel or explosive lightning was instantly frozen. Even the corresponding kinetic energy was stripped away. They rustled like snow, falling to the ground. Such an unscientific spectacle nearly made the eyes of the special police officers pop out of their sockets. Only now did they understand the meaning behind He Yuan's so-called cover. As for He Yuan, she did not retreat when the cold wave flooded the darkness. Instead, she advanced. Her figure could still be seen with her first step. Her second step was blurred and distorted. By the time she took her third step, her figure had completely disappeared. Only a brilliant arc of light sliced through the darkness. And the arc of light was already 30 meters away. Right now, the average distance between the 4 Ablatum Knights and the team was only around 40 meters. Right now, He Yuan had clearly killed her way to the front of the enemy's pouncing formation. If she was even the slightest bit sluggish, there would be a fatal risk of being attacked from all sides by the enemy. But the arc of light was far too fast. They didn't have the time to truly worry about anything. The brilliant arc of light suddenly flashed and extinguished. Practically no sound could be heard as the arc of light flickered and extinguished. But a certain constellation immediately fell apart in Luo Nan's perception on the star atlas. It dimmed and disappeared. It was only at this time that the people with the sharpest ears were barely able to hear the sound of blood splattering within the dark air. Shuele drew a cold breath to the side. A kill in 10 steps. Cat Eye's voice was hoarse within the encrypted channel. Ghost Thunder killed confirmed. The channel was a sheet of silence until Yuan issued a new order. 12 o'clock direction. Accelerate. Following the order, Zhang Yingying, who was in front, did not utter a word. She turned around and sped up. And at the edge of the darkness where the team met, Yuan's figure appeared. She continued to protect the flank, as if nothing had happened before. If there was any change, it would be that she shot a glance toward the center of the formation. Her target was not Luonan, but Shuele, who had just lost his voice. Chapter 231. Luonan paid no attention to the minute changes around him. His entire mind was focused on the changes in the star atlas. The instant Yuan killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash, she also cut open the layer of hazy nebula dust surrounding Ghost Thunder. Before Ghost Thunder died, his constellation finally appeared clearly. Even though it soon dimmed and disappeared, the internal structure of the constellation was still a good reference for Luonan to analyze the other Ablatum Knights of the same order. In the blink of an eye, Luonan's star atlas became much clearer. Correspondingly, the obscure and unclear external force that was exerted from the void became harder to hide. Luonan could see from the star atlas that the force was secretly interacting with the assault formation of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, Ghost Thunder, who was at the front, was killed with a single slash. The force, which was still being deployed, was thrown into chaos. It struggled a few times before it finally scattered. Oh crap! Luonan began to worry for the other side. The force was actually quite considerable, but it leaned towards the mental plane. In order to be effective on the material plane, one needed to find a more suitable entry point for interference. Therefore, it had not been able to truly move down. It just circulated and spiraled, accumulating power in preparation for a thunderous strike. In terms of judgment, awareness, and techniques for accumulating power, Yuan was 1,000 times more professional than Huang Bingjin, who had been shoved into a corner. However, the other side clearly had bad luck. It was not easy for them to have the opportunity to interfere through the use of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, Yuan's frighteningly powerful slash had struck their weak spot. They had probably already suffered a backlash, causing the accumulated power to collapse and scatter in all directions. It was not a big deal for this considerable power to scatter, but it was a disruption to the overall situation of Frost River reality. The special police officers around Luonan were clearly wearing thermostatic exoskeleton armors, but they were shivering. They were affected by the corrosion of this scattered power. But soon, the nearly extinguished format pyramid on everyone's chests lit up once more. It was repaired and perfected, cleanly expelling this inexplicable chill. Your reaction is quite fast this time. Bai Xingyan gave a light praise in the channel. She took the opportunity to ask, your body is fine, right? Is there a time limit to the blessing of the Shield of Truth? It should be fine. Luonan responded casually. Most of his mind was still focused on the Star Atlas. The timely addition of the format pyramid's augmentation wasn't due to his fast reaction. Instead, it was because he was trying his best to maintain the star chart that he had drawn with great difficulty. Why was Luonan worried for the enemy? It was all because the effects of the energy dissipation were too annoying. In the next few seconds, Frost River reality was a scene of chaos. The trapped citizens were already terrified and restless in the darkness. They were swept by this power that was brimming with negative psychic waves. Their mental defenses were about to collapse. For a time, screams and wails rang out in Area A. Even when the gunmen went on a killing spree, it was not as miserable as this. If the hearts of the people became unstable, the life sketches would also be affected. Luonan had been mulling over whether or not he should give a boost to everyone within the range of his senses, but it was too late in the end. Stabilizing the souls of almost 100 people and sorting out their auras in the midst of the rampaging negative spiritual waves was beyond his ability. In the end, The star map couldn't help but shake violently. Luonan felt that all the stars were trembling. There were many phenomena of displacement. The structures that had appeared before were all deforming. This destroyed nearly half of Luonan's efforts. Damn it! Luonan could not help but curse. What's going on over there? Shuelei's gaze glanced at He Yuan a few times. In the end, he could not help but ask in a low voice. Right now, his ears were filled with screams and wails. He could not stand this atmosphere. He would rather have a few powerful enemies jump out and fight with his life on the line. But at this time, the Ablatum Knights were intimidated by He Yuan's ghost-like blade techniques and the collapse of the augmentation behind them. They hesitated to move forward, and the team advanced incomparably smoothly. Luonan shook his head, temporarily dispelling the vexation in his mind. He sent a message in the encrypted channel, comforting Shuelei and reporting the situation of his observations. It's nothing for now. It's just that someone is up to no good. But Secretary He / caused a backlash. His power has gone out of control. He can't cause any substantial damage. There were no more than 3 people in the entire team who could truly understand Luonan's words. However, no one doubted Luonan's words anymore after his successive highlights. Instead, they were affected by his train of thought. Most of them guessed and pondered. And at this time, Cat Eyes reported, "My range of perception has been affected. Right now it has a radius of 38 meters. Mr. Luo?" He Yuan immediately looked for Luonan to confirm. Luonan did a rough scan. Though the star atlas had yet to dissipate, the range of his perception was not greatly affected. The positions of every Ablatum Knight were within his grasp. He immediately said, "My side is fine." Zhang Yingying jumped out. "How much is fine?" 80 meters. The number Luonan reported was the same as before. In fact, the radius of his perception on the life plane had already broken through 120 meters. And it was still expanding at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Oh, hold on. Did I make a mistake? Luonan's train of thought suddenly deviated while Zhang Yingying was still sighing with emotion. How strange. The more I look at you, the more I feel that your all-encompassing perception is abnormal. Why are you always able to see things that others can't? Is it because of the psychic's abilities mixed in? The level is very high. The perspective is different. Cat Eyes gave Luonan a rare positive evaluation from the side. And this was the result of her constant observation. The direction of application is different. Bai Xingyan joined in the discussion. Cat's long-range perception is closely coordinated with her body technique. Student Luonan seems to be more focused on pure observation. Of course, it's easier for him to be disconnected. Yes, the direction is different. Luonan suddenly responded. Cat Eyes needs to make a timely response to all changes within the range of her perception. Every detail needs to be clear. And I don't need to consider other problems. I just need to make a choice between precision, range, and level according to the observation requirements. It's fine. There was no way to continue this discussion. Zhang Yingying looked up at the sky and rolled her eyes. This is the strangest thing. So it turns out that your family's mental senses can be adjusted at will? You make it so that the tens of thousands of ability users who have cultivated painstakingly, pondered carefully, and finally found the most suitable soul frequency with great difficulty. Just like this, the millions upon millions of ability users who have fixed the direction of mental enhancement, how do they feel? The discussion in the encrypted channel came to a screeching halt. Luonan didn't know that he had instantly ended a topic. Right now his heart was filled with relief and joy. Sure enough, communication was the best way to solve problems. If it weren't for this, he would still be madly sprinting in the wrong direction. It's too thin. It's too narrow. When he drew his life sketch, there was a problem with the direction of his focus. Just like when drawing, the most taboo was to dig into the details and highlight the parts. Right now, he was unable to project his limited mind into those inexhaustible, deep layers of configurations. Look. Even though the star atlas was chaotic and endlessly turbulent, not a single one of the Ablatum Knights or the trapped civilians could escape his clairvoyance. In the end, that obscure and unknown power was locked onto by his observation. This wasn't because he had dug into the sketches in great detail. Instead, it was because he had grasped the overall composition of the area of perception. He could observe its general outline and know its direction. It was enough. He didn't dig into the details. He looked at the overall situation. He was able to observe the entire domain of interference between the mental and material planes. He was able to observe the entire plane of life. Chapter 232. In order to understand the whole, one must first see. Simply see. Luo Nan's previous clairvoyance mode could not break away from the pattern of the old explanation. He had to honestly expand his domain step by step. He had to consider the body's ability to endure and process enormous amounts of information. But after changing to a new explanation, it was still a sketch to begin with. It was a general impression of the whole. It was a recreation of one's feelings and memories. One only needed to grasp one or two characteristics of life dynamics and use simple brushwork to synthesize them. This was the difference between sketching and sketching. It was the difference between meticulous brushwork and freehand brushwork. Luo Nan summarized life sketches into sketches and configurations. Sketches should be the first. This was the core of the whole train of thought. It was the true direction of application. Before the composition of the whole was confirmed, no matter how real the details were, they could be distorted and absurd when viewed as a whole. Just like the chaotic star atlas outside his body right now. The whole. The whole. Luo Nan emphasized to himself in a hypnotic manner. He closed his eyes, opened them, and then closed them again. Through this method, he forgot all of his old-fashioned modes of observation. He let his thoughts and consciousness expand outwards, to higher heights, to further places and to wider places. At this moment, the range of his clairvoyance was like a contracting and expanding heart. It was like the rising and falling tide. Contracting, expanding, rising, falling. The frequency of the conversion grew faster and faster. The range of conversion grew larger and larger. Suddenly, some indescribable limit was broken. It was like a great river bursting its banks, overflowing in all directions. It was like an iron mold shattering. There was no longer any fixed pattern. There was an instant when Luo Nan felt that his body and soul were about to scatter into the void. Only when the dark chains trembled, and the power of the My Heart's a Prison format appeared did Luo Nan retract. It was also in this instant that the range of Luo Nan's mental senses recovered to the peak value of his out-of-body state. It reached 800 meters. In a few breaths of time, the radius exceeded a kilometer, and it was still expanding. The entire Frost River reality, including the 3 buildings that supported the amusement park, and even some of the surrounding areas were all within the range of his clairvoyance. Blurry constellations appeared one after another. Everyone within Frost River reality was not limited to the people by Luo Nan's side. This included Fairchild Bays, the 7 Ablatum Knights, and nearly 100 trapped citizens. Then there were the people outside of Frost River reality. There were even the police officers on the 3 bearing buildings. There were tens of thousands of spectators. There were stars as bright as diamonds in the constellation system. There were also shadows that were hard to see. There were even dark clouds that were hazy and turbid. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects, and it was difficult to analyze them. Although he didn't try his best to depict it, there was a wonderful connection between motion and stillness, between inanimate objects and life, between the known and the unknown. Light and shadow intertwined. Light and dark corresponded. Illusory and real interacted with each other. Under their interaction, the boundaries between each constellation, shadow and dark cloud gradually blurred. They intertwined with each other, but their trajectories were clear. The Dharma and Logos were in harmony. Finally, they turned into an endless winding galaxy that spread out. Without a doubt, this was the most profound and vast picture Luo Nan had ever drawn in his entire life. It contained layers and mysteries that were hard to fathom. If it was possible, Luo Nan really wanted to be intoxicated by it. He wanted to ponder over every detail. But today, he would no longer sink into it. He just used an independent, transcendent, wondrous perspective to capture, and draw the outline of the structure of this star river. Overall, it was more appropriate to use the word star river to describe this feeling. It was as if Luo Nan was standing at the center of an enormous galaxy. The starlight was sparse in the area he was in, but 3 enormous and bright spiral arms unfolded in his surroundings. These arms accurately represented the number of living beings in Frost River reality and the 3 buildings. However, there was a hazy dark cloud entrenched at the top of each of the 3 spiral arms. It blocked the starlight. The 3 dark clouds were connected to each other, outlining a turbid domain of darkness. The domain pressed heavily above the star river. There were even many penetrations. It was difficult to see the true appearance of the inside. There was no doubt that the 3 dark clouds were where the secular first oblatums of the Order of Justice were located. Looking at the current situation, Luo Nan's previous judgment was probably correct. The 3 first oblatums were all here. Yes, the most important target of tonight had been found. The range of Luo Nan's mental senses continued to expand. Only when the limit of the range exceeded 2 kilometers did the expansion show signs of weakening. The enormous picture of the galaxy had already covered 3 prosperous blocks. The highest point was the high-altitude traffic layer, and the lowest point was the enormous underground drainage system of the city. There were tens of thousands of life sketches that represented living beings, and it was hard to count the number of stars. Of course, from Luo Nan's perspective, the pure void and inanimate objects were merely meaningless shadowy regions. Unless he was willing to expend a great deal of energy, transform his mode, and deliberately observe with clairvoyance. At this time, Luo Nan felt the pressure once more. The stars affected each other, and acted upon each other. In the end, an enormous tension was formed in the depths of the river of stars. It also formed far too much redundant information. In addition, the greater the size, the greater the level of contact, and the amount of information received would naturally increase. Even if he didn't actively sense it, the enormous life level of Xia City's metropolitan area was like a myriad of galaxies in the deep sky, shining light over. Luo Nan pondered for a moment. He took the initiative to reduce the radius of his senses to 1,500 meters. Then he continued to shrink it back. In the end, it reached a kilometer or so. It just so happened to include the entirety of Frost River reality and the conjoined skyscrapers within it. Now that it had stabilized, there was enough margin left. The brilliant Milky Way flowed silently, the light of the stars parted, and the shadows shifted. Luo Nan maintained a vague and subtle connection with the faintly unending starlight projection in the distance. As the range of his clairvoyance was determined, the expanding power was retracted. His detailed senses began to become more sensitive, and the interaction between them began to fine-tune. It even spontaneously affected the subtle discordant areas. Luo Nan didn't need to observe it directly to tear apart many areas of chaos. However, the dark clouds located at the top of the 3 skyscrapers were still thick and stable. It was hard to observe them. Well, at least 2 of them were like this. As for the other one, there was an excess of accumulation, but there was a lack of thickness. Why was it a bit familiar? Luo Nan had a plan in mind. He temporarily withdrew his mind and naturally reached into his pocket. His mind was free of distractions. He completely forgot that his arms were being held by Shuelei and Cat Eyes. He didn't manage to reach the right spot. His forearm swung down, and he swung it far away. He smacked a plump and elastic spot, and there was a faint sound. Cat Eyes instantly turned her head to this side. Even though they were in the darkness, and the brim of her hat covered them, her eyes still flickered with a cold light. It was so piercing that Luo Nan couldn't help but squint his eyes. However, the most important thing was to take out the object. Though his hand felt like the fabric of his pants, it wasn't his pocket. Luo Nan was rubbed twice nearby, but he was unable to pull his arm back. He could only speak to Cat Eyes. "You let go. I'll take the object." At this moment, Luo Nan seemed to feel Cat Eyes tighten her grip on his arm slightly, but in the end, she didn't say anything. She just let go of his hand. Luo Nan finally reached into his pocket and took out the metal box. He weighed it in his hand. Cat Eye's hand noiselessly returned to his arm at this time. She continued to support him, and she spoke in a husky voice that was rarely heard. Do you need help? Luonan looked at Cat Eyes once more. Her eyes were still as bright and cold as before, but there was an unfathomable curve to the corner of her lips that was blurry in the darkness. Her lips hooked up slightly. It was quite contradictory, but there was a novel feeling that Luonan had never felt before. Luonan looked at her, and he had the urge to immediately pick up his brush and draw. Chapter 233. Break it. The cold light in Cat Eye's eyes dimmed. She was a bit suspicious. You're not going to use it as evidence? Luonan blinked again, but he had already drafted a script in his mind. He said, yes. I suspect that this toy has been tampered with. The enemy has used it to establish a snake nest and lock onto our position. Many people raised their eyebrows as soon as he said this. Luonan's words had violated He Yuan's request. His words had entered the ears of others, but no one was paying attention to this right now. Is that so? Zhang Yingying turned her head in curiosity. Think back to the previous time. If the secretary hadn't killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash and affected the enemy's methods, they might have already made their move. At least this is what I feel. Luonan relied on the little bit of credibility he had just established to speak without thinking. In the end, his logic was a mess. But now there were people who believed him. Zhang Yingying's eyes went wide. Then why haven't you thrown it away yet? We have to break it first, right? Humph, Fairchild gave this to you. If he comes back and denounces you, will he? Luonan's astonished expression defeated everything. Zhang Yingying waved her hand. Forget it. Since you say so, watch me. Her voice had just fallen when a clear sound rang in everyone's ears. It was like the trembling of a wind chime. It was pleasing to the ear and heart. Luonan's hand trembled slightly. He saw this rather thick metal box silently split into two halves. A weak electric flame flickered, and then disappeared without a trace. The split was right above his thumb and forefinger. A bit of cold air seeped into his skin. It was as if a sharp and invisible blade had cut across his skin. Hey! Luonan could not help but stare with wide eyes. His body sank a bit. There was absolutely no problem with applying for a severed limb. No need to thank me. Zhang Yingying beamed and waved her hand. Still not throwing it away. It should be fine. Luonan was speechless towards Zhang Yingying. He just replied without thinking. But his mind stirred and he added, I don't know who the first to blade him was. It looks like he's pretty average. Ghost Thunder's death completely severed the subsequent changes. Zhang Yingying could not help but roll her eyes. No matter how average he was still a clear oath first to blade him. In terms of strength, he was able to crush everyone here except He Yuan and Bai Xinyan. Just as these words reached the tip of his tongue, a flat voice rang out from the side. Of the three first ablatums of the Order of Justice in Xia City, and Chengli is probably the one whose words are truthful. He's the youngest, and he relies on his ancestors. His great-uncle is in Wang, and Chengli, just as Zhang Yingying was about to interrupt, He Yuan coldly shot her a glance and pointed at her earlobe. Clearly, he was reminding them not to violate his request and chat casually. What a double standard. The boss is the boss. Zhang Yingying sent a thumbs-up emoji in the encrypted channel, her sarcasm overflowing. Luonan was very surprised. He looked stupidly at He Yuan. No one should have understood the purpose of what he had just said. But He Yuan had cooperated seamlessly with him. If that person was really in Chengli, then the effect of those two sentences would be many times better than his. He Yuan turned her gaze over and gave a slight nod. Luonan did not have the time to think in detail. His mind stirred slightly. He looked at He Yuan, but on the plane of his splendid galaxy form, the dark cloud that he had locked onto long ago surged. It had already lost its steadiness, and now it was surging and churning. Although its aura was astonishing, it could not compare to the other two majestic and solemn performances. Moreover, this dark cloud was splitting off streams of turbid undercurrents. They rushed in the direction of Frost River reality and seeped down. Luonan already felt a chill, while the dark cloud was still circling and accumulating energy. The other's target was this place. Their malice was clear, but they were clearly impatient and angry. The color of their emotions appeared within Luo Nan's clairvoyance. The matter could not be delayed. Luo Nan casually tossed away the metal box that had already been cut in half. His mind scattered into the surrounding dark air. The metal box contained the consumables needed to create the human-faced arachnid. It was useless to take it out by itself. It would only dirty his hands. But as long as he had a matching computer and printer, he could form complex and clear written materials. Luo Nan was probably the best companion in this small area of Xia City. At least from the current situation, the Order of Justice's research on the human-faced arachnid was not any deeper than his. The ink was currently drifting away into nothingness. Other people were unable to sense it, but Luo Nan's soul strength gathered it noiselessly. He needed it twice, but he still felt a bit awkward. His consciousness sunk into the external neuron, and he opened the format pyramid interface. Through this interface, he could communicate with the Wraith sign, who was several dozen kilometers away. He did not need the Wraith sign to do anything. It just needed to stay there and be a model for him. However, he never expected that the Wraith sign would be captured through the original format pyramid system. He had just set up the Galaxy Clairvoyance system to receive information from the Wraith sign. The range of Luo Nan's clairvoyance could not reach that far, but it was just as he had sensed before. The larger the volume, the richer the information received. The Wraith sign was not a living being. The depths of its structure were a mass of primal chaos. There was no life sketch to speak of. However, the structure of the primal chaos formed an obscure shadow under the illumination of other starlight, and under the pull of the format pyramid system. The shadow was projected over a great distance. The power of a simple projection was too small. It could not be of much use, but it was a very good model. Luo Nan originally just wanted to follow the structure of the Wraith sign. He wanted to copy it and make a low-level imitation. But this way, he simply threw the consumables into the projection. This way, it would be an authorized high imitation, right? It was not that simple to duplicate the human-faced arachnid. Huang Bingjin followed the methods of the order and collected the so-called consumables. They were merely of the lowest level. The current Wraith sign was too lazy to even glance at them. No matter how high an imitation was, it was just a likeness. Its functions were simplified, and its power was ordinary. But Luo Nan felt that it was enough. Not long after, a human-faced arachnid that was closer to the original form of the burning wraith floated in the air. In terms of efficiency, the Order's methods were far inferior. Aside from Luo Nan, no one could see the human-faced arachnid right now. The mental plane was endlessly deep and had many layers of structure. It was like layers upon layers of dark curtains. From the human-faced arachnid, it was the best hiding place. Even Cat Eyes, who specialized in perception, or even He Yuan and Bai Xingyan, would find it hard to reach the deeper regions. But Luo Nan's mental senses were able to probe the deeper regions from the very beginning. He was completely different from other people. Perhaps it was because his mental senses were purely for the sake of observation? Under the control of Luo Nan's consciousness, the low-level human-faced arachnid noiselessly infiltrated the void. Not long after, it followed the spiral arm of the galaxy and arrived at the edge of the surging dark cloud. The light of emotion still flickered within the dark cloud. Luo Nan thought back to last week. When he faced Jack, the Wraith sign had taken out a method that left a deep impression on him. The fellow had transformed into a piece of information, a bit of emotion. It had seeped into Jack's thoughts, pushing forward layer by layer, all the way to the depths of Jack's soul. Clearly, the human-faced arachnid had a similar instinct. Luo Nan did not have high expectations for the low-level version. It was fine as long as it could enter and transmit information. The human-faced arachnid swayed outside the dark cloud. It faced the light of emotion within the dark cloud and charged headfirst into it. Chapter 234. Luo Nan had no way of doing anything after the low-quality imitation human-faced arachnid entered the dark cloud. He could see how it operated on the level of human energy and information, but it was very difficult to operate it. It was the same as throwing a listening device inside. Whether or not it would be effective depended on a bit of luck. Right now, the spiral arm of the dark cloud was smeared with complex emotions. It was like a swaying poisonous mushroom, but it was not completely transparent. Luonan felt that it was still lacking a bit. He needed to wait. Luonan did not place all his hopes on the human-faced arachnid. His attention returned to Frost River reality. The battle between Fairchild and Baze was not that loud. Luonan often forgot about their existence. It was hard to imagine how these two experts, who were proficient in body techniques, fought. However, when the Galaxy Clairvoyance system was set up, it was impossible for Luonan to ignore it even if he wanted to. This was because the brightest cluster of stars was right there. This was a very interesting phenomenon. The most eye-catching constellation in Luonan's life sketch was that of Fairchild. Luonan wanted to successfully analyze Fairchild's super strength. It was an impossible task. However, Fairchild had revealed to Luonan the profundities of the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. Fairchild's body was grand and imposing. There was little concealment, so Fairchild's life sketch was clearly displayed. It was obviously impossible to simplify it to the level of cat eyes. However, its structure was complex and it lit up many stars. As a result, Luonan could sense an astonishing brightness and sense of existence amidst the splendid galaxy. It was because of Fairchild that the 8 Ablatum Knights, including Baze, were affected. The nebula dust that covered their bodies would be torn off from time to time, exposing some of the deeper mysteries. Luonan pondered. Through this, he could use it as a reference to pry into the Order of Justice's first ablatum. He just needed a bit more time. But at this time, He Yuan issued a new order in the encrypted channel. 1 o'clock direction 50 meters. Go through exit number 3. Luonan and the others, who had been moving forward, discovered that they had unknowingly arrived at another exit of Frost River reality. This exit was connected to the Bearing building. They could enter Block B of the connected building from here. In other words, they would be able to leave this dangerous area that they had been in for a long time. Zhang Yingying, who was leading the way, couldn't help but say in the channel, "Hey, aren't there still 100 people who can't be saved?" He Yuan replied, "The mission target is the Order's gunmen. Luonan already killed them all, okay? There are at least 10 people inside the 3 buildings." From the current intelligence, other than the Officiant and the Ablatum Knights, there were still 3 to 4 groups of people in the Order that were not under control. Yulan Hotel has confirmed that it's the sniper team. There are also operation teams in the 3 surrounding buildings. Zhang Yingying had been curious about this question for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, "What's the point of killing the gunmen? First Ablatums and Ablatum Knights are the real deal. The gunmen will cause more civilian casualties." Hey, you're saying that a secret-bound First Ablatum and 2 clear-sworn First Ablatums are no match for a few gunmen? For now, yes. After a few consecutive questions and answers, Zhang Yingying was very dissatisfied with He Yuan's answers. Just as she was about to put in more effort, the Red Fox, who had not appeared in the encrypted channel for a long time, suddenly interjected. The direct interference of the mentally enhanced with the material plane is rather limited before becoming an extraordinary. The direct killing power of a mental storm may not be comparable to a metal bullet. And the First Ablatum's weapons are currently at Frost River reality. They are under Fairchild's control. This makes it very difficult for the First Ablatum's energy to deviate by a large margin. He Yuan continued Red Fox's message. Right now, there are at least 30 to 50,000 citizens in the 3 buildings. These people can't take fright. If a stampede were to occur, the consequences would be unthinkable. To accomplish this, the gunmen just need to pull the trigger. And we can't afford to pay this price. Luonan had to admit that He Yuan and Red Fox's words made some sense. However, the 2 of them had just been bickering with each other, and now they were singing the same tune. How could the other people, who had their own standpoints, endure this? Luonan was a bit embarrassed. Compared to He Yuan and Red Fox's train of thought, his thoughts were a bit too presumptuous. Even if he drew out the life sketches of the 3 First Ablatums, It would not be of any substantial help in resolving the current situation. Then should he adjust and search for the gunman? But this would require a large increase in the precision of his senses. Luo Nan realized that he might not have this ability. While Luo Nan was thinking about his own conundrum, Zhang Yingying's thoughts were more practical. How long would it take to circle the 3 buildings? He Yuan answered as if it were a matter of course. We are only responsible for building B. The military will be responsible for buildings A and C. The encrypted channel was immediately shocked. Papercut asked, "The military? The military is personally taking action? Oh right, that flying shuttle just now." Zhang Yingying also shouted, "I knew it. How could there be such a coincidence? You were the one who gave the order to prove Ghost Thunder, right? Did you use your personal connections?" He Yuan herself had a solid military background. This was no secret in the society. However, aside from her military accomplishments, she rarely displayed her personal connections during her time in the society. This sudden mention really caught people off guard. He Yuan did not immediately respond to this question. Zhang Yingying would not let her go. "Hey, wouldn't bringing in the military complicate the situation? Secretary He Yuan was 2 seconds late. Then she said, "It's official cooperation." Huh. He Yuan no longer paid attention to this topic. She directly said, "Enter building B in half a minute. Red Fox, Bamboo Pole, and Papercut are still responsible for Yulan. Pay attention. According to the requirements, we need to deal with the gunman within 300 seconds. A countdown interface was added to the encrypted channel at the same time the information was transmitted. Right now there were only 295 seconds left. The sudden addition of elements made everyone stunned. Papercut was faced with this unreasonable mission. He said in astonishment, "We'll need more than this amount of time to run back." Right when he was doubtful, Red Fox turned around and left without a word. Bamboo Pole pulled him and sped up to catch up. It was as if Papercut had just woken up from a dream. He increased the force of his feet, but he still wanted to ask, "It's not even 5 minutes. What if we can't do it?" "We'll implement the emergency plan in 285 seconds. It's impossible to predict what will happen when the time comes. Speed up." He Yuan urged the team to advance quickly. At the same time, she laid out the next steps of the operation. After Special Police Squadron 2 enters Building B, you will be responsible for guiding and maintaining order. Everyone else, with the floor you entered as the boundary, Mr. Luo, Yingying, and White Salt will form a team and head down. Cat Eyes and I will form a team and head up. Quickly search and deal with the gunmen. Contact them at any time. After 270 seconds, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, we will immediately descend from a high altitude and leave the range of the triangular building complex. Every time she mentioned the number of seconds, it was in coordination with the countdown interface. She reminded everyone that the arrangements were constantly consuming time. The group of people were doing their best to digest this information when He Yuan specifically said to Luo Nan, "Mr. Luo, you must focus your energy. Don't get distracted." Luo Nan was stunned when he heard the hidden meaning in her words. But at this time, he faintly heard a piece of information. It seemed to be a sigh of regret, but it also seemed to be a mockery. Chapter 235. Luo Nan's mind suddenly slanted. This piece of information that had no head or tail did not originate from any member of the team. It did not seem to be directed at any member of the team either. It just soared through the air and reverberated within his mind. He was stupefied for a moment before realizing that there was progress on the human-faced arachnid side. He clairvoyantly observed the dark cloud above the spiral arm of the Star River. He could clearly feel that the density of the dark cloud was decreasing. More and more blurry starlight was reflected. There was even some energy information that was deciphered and analyzed through the human-faced arachnid. Those few words did not seem to be the real-time dynamic of a conversation. It was more like the intense obsession of a certain person's heart, causing the relevant information to grow and accelerate endlessly. It looked like the person within the dark cloud was in a bad mood. He raised his head to look up. Through the metal frame and the transparent glass ceiling, He could see the silhouette of the pitch-black and lightless tall building. It was vaguely similar to the dark cloud in his senses. In reality, the group of people were rushing towards a dark cloud. Moreover, it was the target that Luo Nan was targeting. The color of the light was constantly changing, nearly turning into a poisonous mushroom. Or maybe it was a coincidence. Luo Nan's gaze locked onto a corner of the building. He could not see any clues with his naked eye, but he could feel the malice hidden deep within the air on the mental plane. It grew clearer and clearer as he got closer. Even though He Yuan had warned him not to get distracted, what if he was under the interference of a first ablatum? Luo Nan sent a message in the encrypted channel. It seems like we're being watched. It's that fellow who talks too much. He Yuan's reply was filled with the flavor of a matter of course. As long as we're in one of the 3 buildings, we'll certainly be watched by at least one first ablatum. Don't worry. Don't get distracted. This was the second time He Yuan had warned him. Right now Luo Nan's feet were practically not touching the ground. He was being carried by Xue Lei and Cat Eyes as they sprinted through the connecting passageway. Xue Lei moved close to his ear and said, "You didn't arrange for me just now. You must follow Uncle." He Yuan suddenly asked before Luo Nan could finish speaking. "Has Xue Lei already obtained the talisman?" "I just made small progress in the past 2 days." "Huh." Xue Lei was suddenly stunned. He turned his head to look. "You know?" He Yuan didn't respond. Instead, she issued another order in the encrypted channel. "Xue Lei and Mr. Luo will be in a team. According to the time limit, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, you must quickly leave the vicinity of the building." Xue Lei didn't say anything, but Xue Weiluan was startled. Just as he was about to speak, a message flashed through the encrypted channel. "Hey, Sister Nun. It seems like you're using awakened ones as your criteria. Is this some sort of arrangement by the society?" The one who sent the message was Bai Xingyan, but there was no response from He Yuan. Xue Weiluan's words were blocked by this message. In the face of a completely unknown background, making wild guesses and suspicions was one of the worst things a special police officer could do. It was the same for his father's identity. At this time, the group of people had already entered Building B. The special police formation automatically dispersed. Cat Eyes flashed out of the group and stood together with He Yuan. Zhang Yingying pulled Bai Xingyan over. She grabbed Luo Nan and Xue Lei. "Do you know why you need to concentrate?" The 2 high school students shook their heads. "What happens next will be very exciting." Zhang Yingying blinked. She was just about to say something when she saw Xue Weiluan walking over. She shut her mouth and walked to the side with Bai Xingyan. Luo Nan also hurriedly stepped aside, giving the father and son some time to talk. However, the conversation between the father and son of the Xue family was much more straightforward than they imagined. The 2 men, who were both equally majestic, hugged each other heavily. Even though there was a thick layer of exoskeleton armor between them, it didn't matter. "Do your best. Be careful." There wasn't much time to talk during the continuous countdown. Before their voices could fade away, the glass wall adjacent to the entrance shattered with a bang. The glass fragments flew down and a gale whistled in. Zhang Yingying looked down. "The slope is okay. It's not the straight up or down type." At that moment, Xue Lei could feel his father's arms tightening around him. He grinned and broke free. "Don't worry." Zhang Yingying turned her head to look. "Xue Lei has tried descending from a high building before?" Xue Lei maintained his confident smile. "The gym master taught me the jumping ape technique. I've also practiced a bit of extreme parkour. I've tried it on a high floor, but the distance wasn't very long." "Excellent." Zhang Yingying gave him a thumbs up. "With a burden like Luo Nan, white salt, and I will definitely have to spend a large amount of energy on him. You need to be careful. It's time for a martial artist to crush a mentally enhanced dregs." Zhang Yingying was halfway through her words when a figure flashed by her side. He Yuan and Cat Eyes practically leaped up shoulder to shoulder. They braved the gale and leaped into the dark void. Their figures flipped and they flew up. They only left a message in the encrypted channel. "Hurry up." They didn't have the chance to carefully plan due to the urgency of time. At this time, it depended on whether or not their daily habits were efficient. Right now the power outage of the building and the elevator were out of service. They wanted to complete the entire journey in less than 4.5 minutes. According to the society's usual practice, they relied on the skills of ability users to play fast ascending and descending. Wayne didn't choose Luonan to go up. This fellow's terrible physical skills were probably one of the important reasons. Zhang Yingying shrugged. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew from the moment Wayne arranged the mission that the intensity of this group's mission was much easier. The specific plan of action naturally had to be sent to the encrypted channel. Luonan's sensing radius is 80 meters. Building B's width is around 150 meters. Just make a spiral around the building. If everything goes smoothly, we only need 100 seconds to set foot on Fudong Main Street. Luonan was astonished. That's fast. I won't be able to lock onto the gunman in time. The terrain and angle of the lower floors are meaningless. The possibility of a gunman is too small. The secretary just wants us to retreat. Are you ready? Me and the big guy will go first. Shuelei shuddered. The confident smile on his face was a bit stiff. But no matter what, he couldn't let others, especially his father, see this. It would only cause him to worry. He silently recited the mnemonic that the gym master had personally taught him. Transformed the water and fire into a discipline. He began to encourage himself. I'm different from normal people. I'm really different. Chen Xiaolin's face miraculously flashed in his mind. Then it dissipated like a bubble. The yin and yang within his body rose and fell. His body, which had been eroded by the gale within the darkness, recovered its warmth. The little bit of hesitation and absent-mindedness melted away into nothing. Shuelei was even more certain that he was born for this sort of scene. He tilted his head slightly and locked gazes with Luonan beside him. This was the friend who had drawn him into this wonderful world. The two punched each other. Let's go. As Shuelei shouted, he leaped into the dark void outside. Zhang Yingying also leaped out of the building at practically the same time as him. Then came Bai Xingyan, who was holding onto Luonan's waist with one arm. Shui Weiluan followed closely behind them. He stuck his head out to look, and just happened to see his son. His son was more agile than any ape or monkey. His long arms slapped the glass wall a few times to borrow strength. It was as if he was riding a skateboard as he flew all the way down. Several figures quickly disappeared into the curtain of night. Chapter 236. At the center of the rooftop of Building B, a gear-like structure hummed as it revolved. It constructed an intricate and marvelous formation. Rays of light weaved together like a cocoon, wrapping Enchungli within. With this layer of cover, Enchungli could no longer hide his ashen face. He ground his teeth heavily. His thoughts were completely on the building beneath his feet. He was on the damned members of the society, who made him feel as if his heart and lungs were on fire. As a sworn first ablatum, he could be considered a mentally enhanced in a certain sense. However, his mental senses were never his forte. He needed to use the divination domain to lock onto a target several hundred meters away, separated by several dozen layers of reinforced concrete. However, as long as his consciousness existed in the divine play domain, for a moment, An Wang's evaluation seemed to linger in his mind. How unsightly. An Wang's words were as light and subtle as usual. They were worth pondering. But this time, the most superficial meaning was enough to make Enchungli feel as if he had been slapped in the face. His entire face was wooden. He stood within the magic array, but he felt as if he was imprisoned in a cage. The gazes of the surrounding people turned extremely strange. Actually, the priests and members of the order were far from being able to access information from the divination domain. It was very difficult for them to know what the first ablatums were doing and what they were communicating with each other. However, Enchungli still felt terrible. He had a feeling that An Wang's words had spread far and wide. Correspondingly, his performance as the judge personally appointed by An Wang had spread far and wide. This was completely different from what he had imagined. He had never thought that this half-grown child named Luonan would be so thorny. Other things aside, Luonan's soul strength was extremely thick. Most importantly, it formed its own system. The so-called format pyramid appeared to be illusory and indistinct, but it was like a layer of irritating curtains. It acted as a buffer for penetrating power on the mental plane. And Chungli had tried to use his power time and time again, but he wasn't confident that he would succeed in one strike. He could only keep accumulating power. He hesitated for a long time, waiting for the military to activate the ghost bomb with great difficulty. And Chungli then took advantage of this opportunity. He used the Ablatum Knight as a carrier to find an opportunity to kill the enemy in one strike. But who would have thought that just as the accumulated power was about to take effect, it was chopped off by that damned secretary. He himself suffered a backlash, and his soul was shaken. He still hadn't calmed down. The most damn thing was that Luo Nan and his secretary had mocked him by name after the fact. And this was a one-sided situation where they had guessed correctly about his identity. A great humiliation. If this matter were to spread, then he and Chungli would become an eternal laughingstock in Xia City, and even in the order of justice. He would never be able to survive. At this moment, and Chungli only wanted to avenge his humiliation. The people from the association had already passed through the connecting passageway and entered Building B. Building B was good. He was in Building B. There were 3 connected buildings. The height of the buildings was around 700 meters. They were connected to Frost River reality in the center. Following the arrival of Luo Nan's group, the straight-line distance between the 2 sides had already shrunk to less than 400 meters. The enemy had even divided their forces. A heaven-sent opportunity, and Chungli began to mobilize the power of the divination domain. However, just as he started, An Wang's thoughts cut in and seized all the authority of the divination domain. The projection of the scales of truth in the center of the Great Triangle forcefully attracted the attention of every officiator. The position of the white scale on the classical pendulum scale was lifted up by a bit, and the black scale correspondingly fell down. It looked like the state of imbalance had been corrected. The winding and rotating posture of the Krite on the black scale was more lively than it was at the beginning. This showed that the ritual had made great progress. And Chungli was shocked at first when his authority was seized, but his face burned when he saw this scene. It was reasonable to say that An Wang had personally appointed him to judge Luo Nan with the ultimate goal of breaking the order that Luo Nan had formed. He wanted to release the elements of pain and chaos and make the scales of truth reach equilibrium. Now that there was great progress, and Chungli should be happy. But the problem was, how much of this was due to him? And Chungli had been affected by the secretary's decapitation, and most of the power he had accumulated had been dissipated. Although he had frightened the citizens of Frost River reality out of their wits, the chaotic elements of the 100 or so people couldn't be considered a weight at all. What truly affected the scales of truth was the panic of the surrounding citizens, caused by the power outage of the 3 buildings. And the reason for all this was because An Wang had given an order to the action team. He hadn't used any supernatural powers. And Chungli felt that An Wang was a fool when he compared the 2. However, An Wang wasn't too satisfied with the current situation. It's still a bit lacking. Perhaps I've placed too much of a foundation on the scales of truth. I still need to make up for it. Zheng Xiao, who was on the other side of the building, really wanted to ask. Just what was the foundation that An Wang had placed? But at this time, An Chungli, who was anxious to save face, couldn't wait to say, "Leave it to me, An Wang. This time, I will definitely get rid of those people from the society. You only have one chance, child." An Wang's thoughts were gentle and firm. Only those familiar with him knew that the deepest layer of his thoughts was a callousness akin to an iceberg at the bottom of the sea. Mending the pen after the sheep is lost is not a flock of sheep, but a fence. Its purpose is none other than order. As An Wang spoke, the scene under the projection of the scales of truth quickly changed. It swept over a dense crowd. These people were scattered across the 3 connected buildings. Because of the sudden darkness, they were bewildered and uneasy. However, as time passed, human instincts to adapt to the environment came into play. The convenient and efficient information system of modern society was also the embodiment of rules and order. As the government sent targeted information to all the trapped citizens and instructed them to evacuate, The panic of the people gradually subsided. Tens of thousands of citizens were evacuated from the fire escape and emergency evacuation exits. In modern metropolises, high-rise commercial buildings were often connected by high-altitude stairs and conveyor belts. They were like long vines that extended and entangled in a primeval forest. This also made it convenient for evacuation during emergencies. At this time, people were flowing out of these tunnels like ants. Due to the proper distribution of information, the overall situation was quite stable. However, this also caused the imbalance of the scales of truth to become more serious. Seeing the white scales move down again, not to mention Zheng Xiao, even in Chengli, who hadn't been very focused all this time, couldn't help but divert some of his attention. If the imbalance couldn't be transformed into a balanced state, it meant that the spellcasting had failed. The three of them would suffer a serious backlash. This was much more tragic than the one caused by the secretary earlier. One order, one world. And Wang sighed softly. I like order. Order is the brightest path to the truth. But sometimes, we must abandon the low-level parts and replace them with the high-level parts. To use the low-level world as a ladder to the high-level world. And Zheng Xiao felt that something was wrong. And Wang's request to cut off the power to the three buildings was very inappropriate. And according to what Wang had just said, wasn't it a step further? A step further? What step was it? And Wang's response was clear. Before order, there must be disorder. New birth must be accompanied by destruction. Before the thought was extinguished, a dazzling radiance exploded within Frost River reality. The shockwave instantly flattened the glass wall on one side. 7 or 8 human silhouettes scattered amidst the flying shards of glass that filled the sky. They were thrown towards the three connected buildings. Chapter 237. And Zheng Xiao's thoughts trembled. His emotions were panicked. He wanted to yell at Wang. We've completely crossed the line. Everything that had happened before could be explained by the fact that they had no regard for the civilians during the fierce battle with Fairchild. They could even make a countercharge by saying that the enemy's choice of battlefield was unprofessional. This was a common occurrence. But if they stubbornly insisted on doing things their own way, directly tearing apart the bottom line of the government's social governance, they would blindly terrorize and expand. How would they be any different from the vagrant organizations in the wilderness? If they truly angered the Star Alliance Committee, or even the local powers, many parties would unite to denounce them. Even the First Ablatum Assembly would find it difficult to absolve them. And Wang Chengli was also panicking. His thoughts were similar to Zheng Xiao's, but he was even more advanced. Once the matter was investigated, and Wang was old and experienced, he did not care about anything. The Ablatum Knights only needed to carry out the mission. Those gunmen might not even be able to keep their lives. In the end, only he and Zheng Xiao would be left to bear the blame. And with his previous terrible performance, it was very likely that he would suffer even more losses. No matter how uncomfortable Zheng Xiao and Chengli felt, the situation would not return to zero. As gunfire wildly pulsed in the darkness, the truly terrifying Ablatum Knights frantically accelerated atop the triangular spaceship. They leaped into the air, their targets the three surrounding buildings. The intense light exploded behind them. The chaotic red and blue lights of the police lights interweaved together, foretelling the chaotic scene that was to follow. This was not a diversion, nor was it an expansion of the battlefield. It was purely a destruction. It was very likely that it would be an unbridled destruction. Baze and Chengli believed that he still had a bit of friendship with Baze. He could not help but contact the other side. He wanted to understand just what sort of arrangements Wang had made. He knew that this was meaningless. But if he did not understand this, he would simply suffocate. However, Baze did not respond. When Chengli tried to continue calling out, his scalp tightened. It was as if his consciousness had suddenly fallen into a layer of ice. He could not send out any thoughts. Baze is currently much busier than you. Why don't you do something more meaningful? For example, maintain silence? And Wang's thoughts flowed within the evolution field. He became the master of everything. and Chungli could only shrink into a corner like a decorative pillar. The exchange of thoughts only lasted for a short moment. At this time, the jumping gunfire inside the building was still imprinted in many people's pupils. But then, the trajectory of bullets from other directions tore through the night sky, penetrated the glass curtain wall, and blasted the figure holding the gun into pieces. Even earlier than that, the gunshots from Block B were only echoes. The evolution field faithfully transmitted these changes back, forming an image. Secretary, and Chungli saw the enemy he had just made. In addition, in Building A and Building C, snipers from either the military or the police had instantly killed the gunman, as well as sniper robots that had infiltrated the building at some point in time. No one could pull the trigger a second time. Those brainwashed gunmen were originally abandoned pawns, so it was normal for them to die. However, the loss of these few lives proved a very bad fact. The government, the military, and the association were working together. Perhaps the military's assault team, or even the Deep Blue Walkers, were already on their way in a place where they couldn't see. And Wang, things have gotten out of hand, and Chungli couldn't help but roar. But at this time his body suddenly quivered. The rapidly increasing chaos element caused the projection of the scales of truth to lean more and more toward a balanced state. It instantly crossed an important node, causing the power of the holy artifact to begin to be projected toward the three spellcasters. The function of the evolution field had advanced. The thoughts of the three first ablatums converged in a certain sense. And Chungli still did not have any authority, but at least he had become more sensitive. He could sense that the Krite was attempting to absorb even more chaos element on the black plate. That thing was indeed growing. However, there was interference. There seemed to be an invisible sieve under the night sky. Someone was attempting to gather this chaotic region, or at least bestow a unique order upon this region. The image within the evolution field continuously switched, sweeping over all the members of the society. This included the secretary that Chungli paid special attention to, as well as Luo Nan, who was about to land. And Chungli noticed that the teenager was currently looking up at the sky. His expression of astonishment was extremely obvious. He should have been startled by the intense changes. The problem was that his gaze was not directed at the ceiling of Frost River reality, where the Ablatum Knights were soaring. Instead, it was directed at a higher altitude. "It's him. It's that kid." And Chungli blurted out. Actually, he did not know whether or not Luo Nan was the problem. However, the thought of using someone else to do his dirty work was enough for him to express this sort of judgment. And Wang did not respond. Then the image switched, proving that he did not care about Chungli's judgment at all. The image was focused on the sky above Frost River reality. This enormous triangular spaceship had become a tattered biscuit that had its insides hollowed out due to the collision between Baze and Fairchild. The 7 Ablatum Knights had already leaped away from this place. Their speeds were fast, and they had already collided with the outer glass curtain wall of the building. The ceiling was completely empty. There was nothing there. But soon, the integrated image of information inexplicably shook for a moment. Wondrous ripples even blossomed in the evolution field at that location. It was not an illusion, and Chungli's eyelids twitched. Slight distortions appeared on the magical array constructed from high-energy light beams around his body. Correspondingly, the flow of energy that was originally as smooth as water formed a vortex out of thin air. It was just that the operation of the magical array had nearly entered a fork in the road. While Chungli was distracted, the image displayed by the evolution field switched once more. It pointed at the first of the Ablatum Knights to charge up the building. And Chungli remembered that this fellow was Flying Shark. His speed underwater and in the air was first-rate among this group of people. The force of his charge was very strong, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. There was a boom as the enormous glass curtain wall was smashed into pieces by Flying Shark. That fellow must have locked onto the direction before he exerted his strength. There were 20 to 30 citizens who did not have the time to evacuate behind this piece of glass. Flying Shark's extraordinary power was poured into every piece of glass shard that flew everywhere. The fate of those unlucky bastards was probably the same as being shot by a shotgun. The first wave. And Qingli could already foresee the scene of blood flowing like a river. However, what appeared in the evolution field next was not flying flesh and blood. It was not miserable wails. It was just streaks of distorted flowing light. Then there was nothingness. Where? Where is he? And Qingli's thoughts froze for a moment. After a moment, the glass curtain wall shattered one after another. The Ablatum Knights landed on the building one after another. However, they were faced with an incomprehensible emptiness. There was not a single shadow within the entire building as far as the eye could see. The kite materialized in the projection of the scales of truth stiffened. Soon after, it melted into the smoke of the plate. The black plate rose up all the way to the top. Correspondingly, the white plate on the other side heavily pressed down. Chapter 238. Luo Nan and the others had just stepped onto the side road of Fudong Main Street when the shockwave enveloped the area around Frost River Reality. Just as Zhang Yingying had expected, there were no gunmen on the lower floors. The journey down was easy and pleasant, and it took them less than 100 seconds. They even had the time to think about it a little more. With the shadow of the building, they could quietly descend so as not to be too shocking. However, the actions of the Ablatum Knights above Frost River Reality made their cautiousness a joke. Just what is he doing? When Zhang Yingying saw the shockwave that exploded within Frost River Reality, and the figure that flew out, her usually jumpy train of thought was somewhat unable to hold on. There was nothing strange about a few gunmen dying right after they opened fire, and getting rid of them cleanly. Compared to the few Ablatum Knights, they were not even worth a fart. If I had known that this would be the result, I wouldn't have been so hesitant. I would have just taken action. That's for sure, and Wang's brain has already atrophied. Hiss. Zhang Yingying suddenly covered her ears and frowned. Half of Luo Nan's brain was stupefied a bit earlier than her. This was probably the most intense tinnitus he had ever felt in his entire life. It rang loudly, making him suspect that someone had fired a gun right next to his ear. He also covered his ears and couldn't help but grimace. What happened? Shuelei was originally immersed in the successful high-altitude rapid descent experience, but he was given a fright by Luo Nan's desperate reaction. Bai Xingyan glanced at the two of them, then lowered her head to look at her wristband. She then shrugged. There's a problem with the encrypted channel. On the screen of her wristband, the countdown stopped at 97 seconds. It's the collapse of the psychic wave network. Zhang Yingying recovered from the initial shock and patted her ear lightly. She had a strange look on her face. I haven't had this symptom for a long time. Is the president doing some extreme experiments again? This is the mission process. Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped talking. At this time, Bai Xingyan cast her gaze toward the end of the auxiliary road. Shuelei was a bit hesitant. He raised his head to look with uncertainty. In the end, Luo Nan recovered from his tinnitus state with great difficulty. He blurted out the most crucial words. Where is he? In this instant, the brilliant river of stars that Luo Nan used clairvoyance to illuminate was silently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. There were only a few dozen stars left, as well as the nebula dust that was even harder to see. Such a strong contrast caused Luo Nan to be stupefied in place. At this time, Zhang Yingying grabbed his arm to make sure that the two of them were a little closer. Then, she looked at Bai Xingyan, and the few of them carefully walked out of the side road. At this time, the night rain had not stopped. The police lights were on, the street lights were on, and the public transport vehicles were also on. Only the buildings behind them were pitch black. The contrast between light and darkness was strong. However, regardless of whether it was in the light or in the dark, there was not a single person within their line of sight. The entire street, the entire building complex, and even the blurry city under the curtain of rain were all empty and devoid of life. If there were strong people, they would be the Ablatum Knights, who had just shattered the glass curtain wall. There was also Frost River Reality, where Fairchild and Baze had suddenly engaged in a direct and violent confrontation. There was also the first Ablatum and his subordinates within the three dark clouds at the top of the building. These people took the form of constellations, nebula dust, and appeared on the plane of Luo Nan's mental clairvoyance. Compared to the vast and resplendent star river from before, the sparseness was shocking. "Oh, I made a mistake." An inexplicable voice penetrated into Luo Nan's mind. And then the background noise suddenly became rich. A ripple seemed to streak past Luo Nan's eyes. He let out a cry, and his entire body seemed to be electrified. His vision blurred, and the dense starlight and the gloomy void transformed back and forth several times. Only then did it stabilize and return to its normal state of the brilliant star river. However, there were some subtle differences. On the plane of reality, a dense mass of people appeared out of thin air. They rubbed shoulders with one another as they hurried past, submerging the small team of 4. Most of the people were far away from this area. They occasionally turned their heads to look at the pitch-black building, revealing expressions of confusion and suspicion. This was the scene that should have happened in reality. But what was that just now? "Hey, did you see that? Those Ablatum Knights. They're gone." Zhang Yingying's voice suddenly lowered. It was a bit hoarse. "There's also Fairchild and Bays." Bai Xingyan cast her gaze toward Frost River reality. There, the impact of the battle had strangely disappeared without a trace. All that was left was the broken outer wall of the building. Luo Nan added in his mind, and the 3 first ablatums on the top of the building. "They're on the other side." Bai Xingyan muttered to herself for a few seconds before speaking softly. "It's like a legendary technique like spatial fault. They can intercept a segment of spacetime and replicate it. Or they can use the projection of the world. I've only heard that there are some extraordinaries who flaunt themselves as gods who possess this sort of nearly inexplicable spacetime ability." Spatial fault? Zhang Yingying had heard of this for a long time, but it was mostly in the works of fantasy. She could only spread her hands. Right now, the only known extraordinary in the entire city is the president. Huh. The gazes of the 2 beauties, each with their own characteristics, locked. Zhang Yingying subconsciously reached out to touch her ear. The encrypted channel had yet to be restored, and the chaos of the psychic wave network continued. However, as long as one wanted to understand the situation, one could still use the primitive method of using a wristband. Zhang Yingying began to make calls. She wanted to find someone to clarify things. Fault. Luo Nan, who was next to her, naturally heard the conversation between the 2 women. He blinked, and his consciousness flowed, permeating through the void. The brilliant star river of his clairvoyance was still the same as before. There seemed to be nothing abnormal. However, after the experience he had just experienced, the greatest abnormality was that there was nothing abnormal. Due to the appearance of the spatial fault, the Ablatum Knights, Fairchild, the 3 first Ablatums, and the other members of the Order of Justice were all swallowed up. These people no longer existed on the plane of reality. Regardless of whether or not this was the work of that person, this change should be reflected in Luo Nan's mental senses. It was just like when he first entered the spatial fault, and instantly sensed the change. However, the reality was that regardless of whether it was Fairchild's magnificent and dazzling constellation, the nebula dust of Bays and the other 8 Ablatum Knights, or the dark cloud formed by the 3 first Ablatums, all of them remained within the star atlas. There was just an additional layer of indescribable layers. The reason for this was that although Luo Nan's body had come out, his consciousness, or at least a portion of it, remained within the spatial fault. It carried out the work he was most familiar with. Observation. Luo Nan was simultaneously observing 2 worlds. They were independent of each other, yet they overlapped with each other. A brand new dimension was opened within the 3-dimensional structure of clairvoyance. It was a feeling that defied all human experience. It could only be sensed, but it could not be described. It was extremely bizarre, yet brilliant beyond compare. This was especially true when the 2 worlds, which appeared to be completely identical, overlapped with each other in reality. This gave Luo Nan an additional angle of observation. The dark cloud of dust, which was originally chaotic and unclear, became much clearer. Even though it was still difficult to refine a life sketch in the form of a constellation, it was still possible to draw an outline that was not too different from each other. It was more distinguishable from each other. And so, The dark cloud that affected observation gradually thinned and split apart, revealing the true faces of the 3 first oblatums of the Order of Justice. Soon Luo Nan found the one with the highest status. It was an old man wearing loose robes. He stood in the middle of the landing platform of Building A. His figure was thin and withered. He looked old and clumsy. Needless to say, this was Wang. Although he was trapped within the spatial fault, this old man did not show any signs of anxiety. He just smiled and sighed with emotion. Doing things that ordinary people are unable to do is called extraordinary. Ouyang, compared to you, I really am old and decrepit. Wang, you praise me too much. As Wang spoke, a middle-aged man appeared on the rooftop of the building Wang was in. He wore a black suit that seemed like he was about to attend a banquet. He stood about 10 meters away from the century-old man and bowed slightly to show courtesy. Chapter 239. Ouyang. President Ouyang Chun. Luo Nan finally understood He Yuan's meaning. No wonder she didn't consider the strong members of the order at all. So she was waiting here. He had never truly seen Ouyang Chun before, but he had heard of this division president who taught ability users with the theory of internal logic, invented the hexaear, and established the psychic wave network. Ouyang Chun's name reverberated like thunder in his ears. Now that he saw Ouyang Chun face to face, he felt that Ouyang Chun's image was quite consistent with his expectations. He didn't feel unfamiliar at all. Wang and Ouyang Chun were even more familiar with each other. They had both been in Xia City for many years, keeping each other in check. The number of interactions between the two was even greater than the number of members and followers they had. This old man, who was already over 100 years old, raised his head to look at the night sky, which was no different from before. He muttered, "The logic world. I remember that you once discussed a similar concept with me. I was asking for guidance." Ouyang Chun was still modest and low-key, but I refused. Wang reminisced about the past and was rather emotional. Clergy and researchers are the same. They both yearn for the truth, but we won't place holy objects on the experimental table. We will always have a forbidden zone. Reverence or fear. In short, we must avoid it. But researchers are different. You can trample on the holy domain at any time. Ouyang Chun listened quietly, not refuting. But as an extraordinaire, just by standing there, he made everyone on the landing pad, other than Wang, feel uneasy. Actually, when Wang and Ouyang Chun's conversation was transmitted to the other 2 first oblatums through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao and Chungli reacted as if they had swallowed a bomb. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and Chungli groaned. This guy came out of the laboratory. He must have crossed the line. Oh shit. Wang laughed. Ouyang, my children don't understand you. They don't understand your work. Ouyang Chun's gaze flitted across the complex light diagram around Wang's body. Just like Wang, he raised his head to look at the sky deep in thought. He did not immediately respond. Wang quickly withdrew his gaze. He was like an old friend, a senior, analyzing Ouyang Chun's actions. You have never been an inventor. You are a theoretical researcher. You grasp a question, and you will research around it until you form a valuable system. For example, when you set up the psychic wave network, others only saw the convenience, but I knew that you were researching the soul, researching mental energy, and researching the existence of the mental plane relative to the material plane. You wanted to figure out where the power that distorted reality came from. Ouyang Chun looked at the old man's mottled face and replied calmly, "This is what I've been pursuing. According to your church, it is the source of the world's revolution." Oh yes, the gate of truth is open. The fact that Wang had so easily said the keywords made the 2 first oblatum scalps tense. Was it really this old man who had not hesitated to shed all pretense of cordiality with child and push for the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Tsang in the dark? I feel like we are all a joke. On Zheng Zhao's side, Chungli once again contacted him through a private line. There's definitely something wrong with that old man's brain capacity. Or perhaps he simply doesn't take us seriously. We should think of a way. Zheng Xiao suddenly could not hear anything. This private line of communication had been inexplicably severed. At the same time, an ice-cold and penetrating intent cut through his nerves within the evolution field, slowly grinding them away. And Chungli's situation would only be worse than his. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes, and then opened them again. There was no doubt that the old man had always known about this private line of communication between him and Chungli. He just turned a blind eye and let them play around. Perhaps Zheng Xiao should rejoice. Even in private communication, he had never spoken ill of Wang out of caution. But at this moment, he was not only worried that the old man would dig up old debts, but he was also unable to understand why Wang had suddenly expressed his attitude in such a frank manner. What was the meaning behind this? Unbeknownst to him, Zheng Xiao's attention turned to the core of the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth. The unbalanced state continued, but Zheng Xiao noticed that the white plate, which had been pressed down to the bottom, had lifted a little at some unknown time. The crite that had materialized on the black plate had also begun to recover its vitality. Then where was the opposing chaotic element? Zheng Xiao seemed to understand something in a daze, but the pressure on the mental plane had risen once again. It was ice-cold and heavy, making it impossible for his thoughts to go any deeper. The conversation between Wang and Ouyang Chen was as warm as a spring breeze. No matter what, I can feel your accomplishments. Ouyang, you are attempting to redefine the laws of the material plane. Ouyang Chen shook his head slightly. If such a form truly exists, I hope that it can be reproduced. But up until now, all I have been able to do is create a plausible model, a tiny instance. At the very least, this is a battlefield where I can freely move my hands and feet. It is enough to reduce the impact on the secular world. Look, Fairchild and the others are having fun fighting. While Wang was speaking, Frost River reality was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the two powerhouses. The connection between Frost River reality and Building A broke. A large half of the structure fell down. Fairchild and Baze's figures flew up at nearly the same time, smashing into Building A's body. Immediately, an even more powerful shockwave swept out. The glass walls of over 10 floors above and below were shattered with a loud rumble. Glass flew down like rain, and the entire building seemed to shake. If this was the plane of reality, the casualties of the surrounding citizens would be in the hundreds or thousands. But now there was not a single person in the building. Even if it was completely demolished, it would not matter. The only thing they had to worry about was the church members on the rooftop. The confrontation between Fairchild and Baze grew more and more intense. Although Wang had taken the initiative to bring it up, his gaze was focused on Ouyang Chen for the majority of the time. He was extremely focused. Wang, it really is a very good design. Wang stared at Ouyang Chen and nodded slightly. You have maintained a very high degree of independence. You are mostly borrowing the existing objects of the material plane. The consumption is not much, and the pressure you endure is not great. It is hard to imagine that this is a flawed product. Ouyang Chen smiled in response. So the possibility of it collapsing due to overload is very small. Wang does not need to think in this direction. Wang could not help but laugh when his thoughts were exposed in a single sentence. Ouyang, since you clearly know that this is an unsuccessful work, why don't you continue researching it? Stay in your laboratory and concentrate on it. Ignore the disturbances of society and let it proceed according to the established method. Wang, I am doing it according to the established method. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.